Hi, welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Show. So, Israel, I'm taping this on Sunday, and on Friday morning, something pretty appalling happened. On a morning news show, prime time for morning TV, on one of Israel's main television channels, Channel 12. They have the highest rating in Israel. They have this news program on, and it's co-hosted by this former model named Galit Gutman, and Israel Hayom's chief military commentator, Yoav Limor, and they have guests, and it's a studio thing. And so at some point during the conversation, Galit Gutman decided that the time has come to just go full-on der Stürmer, and she started attacking ultra-Orthodox Jews as bloodsuckers.
תשלמו מיסים מטורפים. תגידו, אתם לא רואים מה קורה פה? אתם כמה נטל יכולים לשים על שליש מהמדינה הזאת בשביל להחזיק בסוף את כל החרדים האלה שמוצצים לנו את הדם?
And she's sitting in this studio, and we'll show you the footage in the back, I hope. And there are all of these people sitting around her, and nobody says anything except this one guy who kind of clears his throat and says sort of not acceptable the way that you're talking about them, named Barak Seri, who's running for mayor of Ashdod. So he says, she calls ultra-Orthodox Jews bloodsuckers. This is a term used, among others, by the Nazis, right, by Adolf Hitler, and it's being used on morning television in Israel by a former model against 1 million Israelis who are ultra-Orthodox. She calls them bloodsuckers, and he says, you know, that's sort of not an acceptable way of talking about people, and she says to him, you have too many Haredi voters in Ashdod. I'll sit here and tell the truth, right? And then she said again that they were milking the people, and then she said, they are sucking our blood and cheating us. They've lost all shame. And enough with all this pretty talk. Okay? That's what she says. She calls them bloodsuckers twice or 3 times in a 2-minute period. She says that they're milking the system or bilking the system. They have no shame and they're cheating us. This is on Israeli television, not on German television, not even on Iranian television. This is on Israeli television, of course, not Palestinian. And former model, really rich, really beautiful, a lot of Botox, and nobody in the studio except this guy who's running for mayor of Ashdod says anything. There are another 6 people there, including her co-host, Yoav Limor. There's a huge public outcry afterwards on Twitter, on Facebook, coalition members, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Communications Minister Shlomo Kari, and anybody else you can think of. And of course, the ultra-Orthodox ministers themselves. She puts out Friday afternoon this apology, right? If anybody, among the Haredim was offended by this, I'm sorry. That's not exactly an apology because, of course, it's not just Haredim. Like, I watched it and I was offended as a Jew, and as I would assume as a human being, but as a Jew, I was offended. She was using rank anti-Semitic language on television to attack an entire sector of Israeli society. And she said, if you were offended, I'm sorry. If you're an ultra-Orthodox Jew who was offended, gee, I'm sorry for calling you a bloodsucker. And she wasn't suspended. She wasn't suspended this morning, Sunday morning. Channel 12's Keshet, they're the people who run this show, said that she was going to apologize on the air on her next show on Thursday. Well, I'm not watching it. In fact, I'm not going to watch Channel 12 again until she's fired. But really, I guess we shouldn't be too hard on her, although I think you can't really be hard enough on her. But she's not a lone voice in the wilderness. Other people have said similar things. Daniel Ben-Simon, a former member of Knesset, Haaretz reporter, he was on the Knesset channel, that state-funded channel of the Knesset, sort of like our C-SPAN, and he was on a panel discussion there, and he said, I will not sit with an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and also demonize them. And then Saturday night, at the weekly leftist, we hate the coalition, we hate religious people, we hate national religious people, whatever. So the former head of the Shin Bet, Carmi Gilon, he's largely responsible for the Rabin assassination. He was the head of the unit in charge of protecting Rabin, and he completely failed, and he was promoted to head the Shabak. So he is a radical leftist. He's speaking at this rally last night, and he says Haredi and Haredi Zionist politicians are the Jewish Jihad, and they pose an existential threat to the Jewish state. So the Haredi politicians and there's like the Haredim, which are, they don't, by and large, most of them don't serve in the army. And then you have the Zionist Haredis who do serve in the army, and they're sort of on the spectrum between that and the religious Zionist community and the modern Orthodox community. So that's sort of the spectrum. And so he's saying that they are the Jewish Jihad. They are Al-Qaeda. They are Daesh. They are, they are Hamas. And they are an existential threat to the country. Why are they an existential threat to the country? Well, just because. Why not? Because we're all engaged now in hating them. And then other heads of these protest movement, like this woman, Shikma Bressler, who's become a big thing. She defended Galit Gutman. She said that she's the subject of a witch hunt for calling Jews bloodsuckers on television. She's the victim. She's the victim, right? And Garmi Gilon piles on and says that the ultra-Orthodox politicians and the ultra-Orthodox Zionist politicians are Jewish jihadists and an existential threat to the country. So they're not standing down. And then that really sort of raises the question, what are these people talking about? What are these people arguing about? What are these protests about? And you see they're themselves going through soul searches now because the crowd numbers are down. People don't really want to protest anymore. It's 20 weeks into it. The legal reform has been put on the back burner. Everybody's meeting at the president's house and trying to put together a compromise. Either they will or they won't, whatever. But it's kind of gone off the headlines because it hasn't been legislated and it's not really clear what's going to happen with that. So they moved on from there. By the way, again, I'm writing a book now because of what they're doing on the Israeli left, right? And so I've been thinking about this a lot, even more than I've been writing about it, even more than I've been talking about it, because I'm trying to put together this book. And, when you look at it, is this a bad ideology? Is this a right-left thing? Well, not really, because you have right-wing politicians ostensibly like Gideon Sa'ar and Matan Kahana and others who presented more far-reaching calls for legal reform as bills in the Knesset just yesterday or the day before yesterday. And now they're saying that the bills that Yariv Levin, the justice minister, put forward are going to destroy Israeli democracy. And is it about hatred of the Haredim? Well, sort of, except all of these parties that are in the opposition, that are in the streets and are calling Haredim bloodsuckers or existential threats to Israel, talking about civil war all the time, calling for companies to disinvest from Israel, calling for Standard & Poor's and Moody to lower our credit ratings. None of this has worked, but these are the things that they've been doing, lobbying foreign governments against Israel. All of these things that they're doing, they also said, okay, Haredim, you write your ticket. Whatever you want, we'll give you so long as you support our government. Don't vote for the opposition. Either join our coalition, don't join our coalition. But anything that you want, we'll give you so long as you leave the right. So long as you leave the right and join us or don't vote with the right, or let us lead the country. And this sort of reminds me of an exchange that the head of the ultra-Orthodox community for many, many years, Rabbi Shock, had with Rabin in 1992 when Rabin formed the government. And the Ashkenazic ultra-Orthodox refused to join his coalition. Shas joined briefly, left. And Rabin came to Rabbi Shock and he said, look, we'll give you everything that the Likud will give you. Why don't you join my coalition? And Rabbi Shock said, because it's not about money. The Likud and Likud voters are traditional Jewish voters. They like this. They like Judaism. They may not keep all of the mitzvahs. They may not be ultra-Orthodox or maybe not Orthodox at all, but they have respect for Judaism. And you guys don't. You guys want to tear it down. So you give us money and you tear down the house. What are we going to do with the money? So he refused to sit in a left-wing coalition, and that position has been pretty consistent since then among the Ashkenazic and then subsequently also the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox party, Shas, that had briefly joined the Rabin government and then left when they went on with the Oslo thing. So this is they don't have a problem with Haredim. They have a problem with Haredim because Haredim won't support them politically. If they did, then they would get everything that they want, and nobody would call them bloodsuckers. Everybody would defend them. They would defend them against the national religious parties, the Zionist ultra-Orthodox, and there's always going to be somebody else that they can demonize. And so, all right, so it's not about legal reform because they wanted all the things that now they say are going to destroy Israeli democracy if they go through. It's not about hatred of Haredim. I mean, maybe it is, but they'd be happy to do even more for the Haredi religious institutions in the budget than Netanyahu is willing to do. It's about something else, and I think that what this is about is privilege. I think what they're trying to defend more than anything else is their privileged position in Israeli society. They want to remain in charge of the deep state. They want to remain in charge of the legal system, which is completely non-democratic, right? The Supreme Court justices who choose themselves, they're self-selecting. I saw an interview that Walter Russell Mead did in a podcast with, I think, John Anderson, the former, I think, Prime Minister of Australia, has his fantastic podcast, and he interviewed Walter Russell Mead last week, and he asked him about Israeli democracy and all of the allegations that Israel is becoming an authoritarian state. And he said it's complete nonsense. Imagine how Democrats would behave if Republican Supreme Court justices were able to appoint themselves. They have 6 now. Majorities say they were able to institutionalize that majority and keep it forever. The Democrats would burn America apart. But that's now the left in Israel is setting fire to Israel because they fear that continued total monopoly control of the left over Israel's judiciary is being destabilized, is being taken away. It might be taken away from them eventually. There might be more accountability of judges. They might have limits on their power. And so that's totally unacceptable. They have, it's the same thing with the retired generals. They want their privileged position in Israeli society. The IDF general staff that sided very clearly with the protesters, and they took no action, even though it was a criminal offense against the pilots who said that they weren't going to attack in Iran if the judicial reform went through. This is a criminal act, and everybody, all the PR executives who were behind the pilots saying that they weren't going to serve, they weren't going to go to training missions if the reform legislation proceeded. They what's the word? They encouraged this felony, which is in and of itself, I can't think of the legal term. They committed a criminal act by soliciting this refusal to serve on the part of the Air Force pilots, and as a retired IDF colonel wrote recently in a paper, he said, Colonel Siboni, he said, look, this is a criminal act. And in a way, it's a criminal conspiracy, and it was never investigated, and it was all shushed up, and nobody was punished for it, even though these are felony crimes. Both the pilots and those who solicited their crime are all felons, ostensibly, and they were never investigated. So, why is that? So some of the other things that people are looking into, there are all of these really cool units in the IDF that the only people who are allowed to serve in them are people who have been previously recommended for the position. So it's not merit, it's who you know. And that's institutionalized in these units that anybody would want their son or daughter to have the privilege of serving in, but it's closed off. It's members only. And if you open up the general staff, then you open up the people who can get in. Or maybe you might, God forbid, make the service in these units based on merit as opposed to who you know. So if it's not an old boys club, this is an old boys club gone amok. And so they control where their kids get to serve in the Army, and then depending on where you serve in the Army, you get jobs after the Army, you get into, attractive faculties in the universities after the Army, and so on and so forth. And to the extent that you have a privileged position in Israeli society and you're able to maintain it over time and into the next generation for your kids, just like you got it from your parents and your grandparents, well, then why would you want to give that up? And all the riffraff that is trying to get in and take away your privilege, right? They're suddenly evil. They're destroying democracy. They're criminals. And I'm going to have as my guest on the Caroline Glick Show this week, my longtime friend, Moshe Kowarski, who's been looking into just, those kinds of allegations that formed the basis of the indictment against Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we see that it was all cooked up. Well, you want to criminalize the other side. So Netanyahu has to be corrupt. Why does he have to be corrupt? Because he's on the other side. He's the head of the other party. So we want him to be corrupt so that we can say that politics are corrupt. Politics are corrupt. Why? Because we don't have a majority. And, if the majority of Israelis doesn't support us, then we want to maintain our power through non-democratic means. And that's who maintaining privileged positions in key nodes of Israeli society. And then that brings us all back to Galit Gutman and the media in Israel, right? Because here she is. She's a former model. I read somebody, Yossi Baum, this investigative reporter, who doesn't work, by the way, for any major media organization, God forbid. All of his exposés, he can only post on Twitter, right? So he just says, here's some background information about this supermodel Galit Gutman, right? Mrs. Botox. Her average in high school, she said, was 70. Okay, that was her average in high school. She served in the, as a secretary in like the most boring manpower division job in the army, and she was put in military jail for a week for smoking dope. Okay, so she's not like she's screaming because I don't serve in the army, the ultra-Orthodox. What was her military service? And she even said at the time, and while she was working in the army, supposedly, she was also working full-time as a model and, making gobs of money. So as a soldier, right? So this is the woman. She's a terrible student. She clearly doesn't know very much. I don't know if she knows that the Nazis called Jews bloodsuckers, but if she doesn't, what is she doing with a morning show? Well, she gets a morning show because of who she knows. She gets a morning show because she's beautiful. She gets a morning show for many, many reasons, but none of them have to do with actual knowledge or responsibility or authority in anything that you'd be discussing at a news show. She's incapable of doing the job that she's supposed to do on the merits, right? She's there because of who she knows and because she's beautiful. That's it. Those are the merits upon which that she received her job. And she and all of her friends, former head of the Shin Bet, by the way, a complete failure in office. Rabin was killed on his watch. Duh. Can't get much worse than that. All of these people, Ehud Barak, the worst prime minister that we had in Israeli history, except for Ehud Olmert, who replaced him. And then, of course, we had Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, two more losers. But, these people were terrible at their jobs. They did terrible, terrible jobs in their positions, for which now we're supposed to respect them because they're former. Okay? They're terrible. And here they are, they're failures, they're serial failures, and they're coming to us, and they're lighting the country on fire. They're calling ultra-Orthodox Jews bloodsuckers. They're telling us that our prime minister is a criminal, and you look at his trial, it's completely fallen apart. So they're using anti-Semitism. I think they're actual anti-Semites, because when you listen to the way that they say it with such passion. They hate all of their fellow Jews with such passion. They hate Netanyahu and his voters and his ministers with such passion. And the thing that's driving him, again, it's not ideology. Netanyahu brought 4 peace treaties. So if this was about peace, they should love him, right? They should love him. They hate him. Why? Because he isn't their guy. He's the other side's guy. And the other side, if they're allowed to actually govern, well, then they're going to lose all their privilege. And you're not going to be able to control the media. You're not going to be able to be a media star just because you're pretty if you're this dumb that you think that it's okay to call Jews bloodsuckers on television. So, I mean, at the end of this day, where you stand depends on where you sit. In a very fundamental way here, these protests in Israel, they're about this, they're about that. The international, communities such as it is, the Biden administration maybe supporting these protesters because they're ostensibly on the left and they want to give away lots of land to the Palestinians and they help in a lot of different ways. But for the Israelis on the ground who are doing this in the television studios and on the streets, this is about power and privilege and not being willing to share it. So it is about democracy. It's a complete rejection of democracy. It's a complete delegitimization of democracy, demonization of democracy, because the one thing that everybody has in Israel is a vote, and they don't have enough of them. The other side, the only thing that it actually wins at, it's not the media. It's not IDF. They just, promoted 3 leftists to the general staff position, and they refused decorated colonels and brigadier generals promotions, and it was just sort of, it was like, it was so transparently politically motivated that these people were promoted and those people were not. It's about that. It's about maintaining position and power. It's about maintaining privilege. It's about keeping, most importantly, the riffraff out, the riffraff being the majority of Israelis who want to go a different way. Now, I think once we understand that, we can put Galit Gutman into a box. It's a big box. It's a luxurious box. But it's a box. It's a box of haters. It's a box of privilege. And it's a box of people who don't care about the general welfare of the Jewish people or the Jewish state. They just care about themselves. And whatever they say, at the end of the day, that's all this is about. So those are my thoughts for the week. And in the meantime, one last thought. Thursday, we celebrate Shavuot, which is the most important, right? In a way, this is when we got the Torah. This is the Chag Matan Torah. This is what we're celebrating, receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's also the Harvest Festival. And anywhere you go in Israel, I know in my backyard, everything is coming into bloom, the grapes, the fruit on the tree, they're all budding or almost ready to be, depending on which kind of fruit it is, ready to be picked. Really amazing time in Israel. And what is Matan Torah? What is the receipt of the Torah? This is, this is it. This is a defining moment in Jewish history. What does it basically say? It says we accept the divinity of God, of one God, and his law. And he is the one who's giving us this law, which means that no man can take it away from us because it's divine. And the concept that you're under God and that he is the repository of power and he's giving you a way to live, it means that inherently you can't accept the idea of an absolute ruler. An absolute ruler, there's only one, and he's divine, he's God. And underneath him, the humanity that he created, well, we all have limited powers. Our king has limited powers. He's limited by the law of God that forces him to recede and open up space for freedom for his people. And that's sort of the universal message of the Torah. There are a lot of specific, very particularistic messages for the Jews, but that's the universal tiding that the Torah brought to the Jews and through the Jews to humanity. And so in a way, we should all celebrate, Jew and non-Jew, Shavuot, because this is the moment where freedom began. This is the moment in human history where human freedom on a fundamental level began. So whether you're Jewish, if you're Jewish, Chag Sameach, and if you're not Jewish, enjoy this moment of freedom, and we have to cherish it and keep it and remember that we are actors upon a stage and certain things are expected of us. And one of the things that's expected of us is to respect our fellow human beings and not to think that just because somebody's different from us that we get the right to judge them and tell them who they are. Because the minute that you think that, then you can be manipulated into becoming Galit Gutman, God forbid. So Chag Sameach to all of you. Let's revel in our freedom and let's protect it. Thanks a lot. Take care.